Dark Shadows once terrified audiences with its vampires, witches, and the dark secrets of the Collins family. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling was far more chilling. From stars taken too soon by cancer, to broken marriages, to sudden deaths in the dark, their lives were filled with pain. So what really happened to the legendary cast? Let's find out. Jonathan Frid as Barnabas Collins. Jonathan Frid was born on December 2, 1924, in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. In 1967, at 42 years old, he took on the role of Barnabas Collins, the tortured vampire torn between guilt and the desire to be human, a role that saved Dark Shadows from cancellation and pulled him into more than 1,225 episodes. But the spotlight that Barnabas gave him also cast a permanent shadow over his life. Despite his fame, Jonathan never married, never built a home of his own, and his most successful years were accompanied by a chilling loneliness. After House of Dark Shadows, 1970, and Seizure, 1974, he began retreating from Hollywood due to crippling anxiety and stage fright that made his heart race uncontrollably. He chose to walk away from spotlights and film sets. Old age arrived like an icy wave. He began slipping into mild Alzheimer's. Jonathan lived quietly in his peaceful Canadian home, sometimes unable to recall the very lines that once brought Barnabas Collins to the world. Loneliness became a habit, and his withdrawal meant fans saw him only at rare conventions. Tragically, he passed away in the early hours of April 14, 2012, at age 87, after a fall at home led to pneumonia. His burial was simple, just as he had lived. His net worth at death was estimated at nearly $5 million, largely from royalties and the fan events he reluctantly attended. Grayson Hall as Dr. Julia Hoffman. Grayson Hall was born on September 18, 1922, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. At 44, she played Dr. Julia Hoffman, intelligent, strong, and one of the few emotional anchors for Barnabas Collins in Dark Shadows. She was the only cast member ever nominated for an Oscar, yet her life off-screen was a tragedy with no escape. Her marriage to screenwriter Sam Hall seemed steady at first, but disaster struck when their only son, Matthew, developed severe schizophrenia. She kept filming while hiding her grief, crying through nights no audience ever saw. Despite her brilliance in The Night of the Iguana and Satan in High Heels, inside she was breaking apart. The helplessness of watching her son suffer drove Grayson into a collapse so deep she no longer recognized the woman she saw on screen. The final tragedy came in 1982 when Matthew took his own life. She smoked until her lungs burned, as if hoping the smoke would numb the pain tearing her heart apart. Lung cancer soon followed, draining her strength and extinguishing the light in the eyes that once lit up off-Broadway stages. Grayson Hall died on August 7, 1985, in New York at age 62, after 6 months battling lung cancer. She was buried near her home in Rhinebeck, beneath a small, quiet headstone. Her net worth was estimated at $1 million. Joan Bennett, as Elizabeth Collins, Stoddard. Joan Bennett was born on February 27, 1910, in Fort Lee, New Jersey. In 1966, at 56 years old, she stepped into Dark Shadows as Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, the mysterious, reserved matriarch of Collinwood across more than 900 episodes. But few people know that this role wasn't just the most important television performance of her career. It was the final lifeline for a legend Hollywood had once cast aside. Joan's life had once been dazzling. Scarlet Street, The Woman in the Window, 4 collaborations with Fritz Lang, dozens of film noir classics that made her one of the most alluring icons of the 1930s and 40s. But in 1951, her world shattered in a single moment. Her husband, producer Walter Wanger, shot her agent Jennings Lang in the groin right in a Beverly Hills parking lot, convinced she was having an affair. That gunshot didn't just hit another man. It obliterated Joan Bennett's career. Studios shut their doors. Friends vanished. The press turned her into a symbol of betrayal. After the scandal, Joan was no longer the silver screen goddess the world once adored. For nearly a decade, she drifted between low-budget films and small-town theater stages, trying to cling to the last remnants of her career, while Walter Wanger, the shooter, was forgiven and continued producing films as if nothing had happened. The injustice ate at her every day. When Dark Shadows offered her the role of Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, it felt like the final door opening in a room that had been growing darker and darker. Joan Bennett died on December 7, 1990, in Scarsdale, New York, at 80 years old after a heart attack. Her net worth at death was around $2 million, a modest sum for a star who once ruled Hollywood, but enough to remind the world that Joan Bennett mattered. David Selby as Quentin Collins. David Selby was born on February 5, 1941, in Morgantown, West Virginia. In 1968, at 27 years old, he took on the role of Quentin Collins, the handsome, enigmatic werewolf who instantly became a nationwide sensation and turned him into a youth idol across more than 900 episodes of Dark Shadows. But the weight of that fame left deep cracks in the soul of a man who only wanted to act, not be trapped inside the image of a half-man, half-creature. On the surface, David's family life looked stable. His wife, Chip, was always by his side. Their 3 children grew up in a loving home. Yet behind the smiles was a quiet fear he hid for years. After Dark Shadows ended, Quentin's face was everywhere. David admitted that in the 1980s, he suffered severe depression. He was terrified of being recognized by strangers on the street. Still, David fought to stay grounded. He threw himself into work as a way to save himself. Falcon Crest, which ran for 9 seasons, helped him regain confidence in his craft. Raise the Titanic, Dying Young, and many other roles proved that he was far more than the werewolf of Dark Shadows. But the anxiety and lingering dread would return from time to time, forcing him into years of quiet battles with his own mind. At age 84 in 2025, David Selby is still alive, still writing books, still appearing in occasional film projects, still carrying the gentle smile that has followed him for half a century. He says he is grateful for his past, but no longer consumed by it. His estimated net worth is around $10 million. Kathryn Lee Scott, as Maggie Evans, and Josette Kathryn Lee Scott, was born on January 26, 1943, in Robbinsdale, Minnesota. In 1966, at just 23 years old, she joined Dark Shadows as Maggie Evans and Josette, gentle yet haunting characters who immediately won the hearts of viewers. But behind that bright young actress was a long journey marked by losses no episode ever revealed. At the height of Dark Shadows, Kathryn left the United States to follow her husband, photographer Ben Martin, to Paris. Their marriage began like a dream, an artist-journalist-actress coupling straight out of the creative world. But Kathryn's unstable acting career slowly made the relationship fragile. Between film shoots in London and scattered theater performances, she had to sacrifice everything just to stay in the business, while Ben drifted farther away on endless work trips. Kathryn tried to keep the marriage alive, but the emotional distance grew too vast, and the couple eventually divorced in 1990. Breaking her heart in a silence deeper than any on-screen drama. But the greatest heartbreak came when her second chance at happiness, her marriage to Jeff Miller, was taken from her. Jeff developed a rare neurodegenerative disease that slowly destroyed his body in Kathryn's arms. She cared for him while running Pomegranate Press, doing everything she could not to collapse. The nights she wrote her memoir Last Dance at the Savoy were nights she cried beside the bed of a man disappearing before her eyes. The weight of that suffering aged her faster than time itself. In 2025, Kathryn Lee Scott is 82, still writing, still publishing, and even newly remarried to author Patrick Oster, a small glimmer of light after a long chain of tragedies. Her net worth in 2025 is estimated at around $7 million, earned from both acting and Pomegranate Press. Louis Edmunds as Roger Collins and Joshua Collins. Louis Edmunds was born on September 24, 1923, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. In 1966, at age 43, he entered Dark Shadows as Roger Collins and Joshua Collins, aristocratic, commanding roles that made him one of Collinwood's pillars. But in reality, Louis lived a life entirely opposite: fragile, alcohol-dependent, and constantly battling emotional wounds that never healed. He was one of the few openly gay actors of his era, and he lived with architect Norman Weber for more than 30 years. The pressure of performing as himself in public, combined with the relentless filming schedule, drove him deeper into drinking. There were days he arrived on the Dark Shadows set so intoxicated that fellow actors had to physically hold him steady in front of the camera. At one point, producers nearly fired him. After Dark Shadows, Louis found some peace in All My Children, where he stayed for 13 years. But illness began to stalk him like a shadow. Alcohol ravaged his lungs, and long nights of coughing up blood forced Norman to watch over him like a desperate guardian. Louis Edmunds died on March 3, 2001, in Port Jefferson, New York, at age 77, from respiratory failure caused by lung cancer, a disease fed by years of drinking and relentless loneliness. He passed away in the arms of Norman Weber, who had remained by his side for over 3 decades, quietly devoted until the very last moment. His net worth at the time of his death was estimated at around $4 million. Lara Parker as Angelique Bouchard. Mary Lamar Rickey was born on October 27, 1938, in Knoxville, Tennessee. In 1967, at 29 years old, she entered Dark Shadows as the witch Angelique Bouchard, a character of mysterious beauty and razor-sharp gaze who became the symbol that set the entire series ablaze. But when the stage lights dimmed, Lara's life became a solitary journey marked by emotional wounds. 2 marriages shattered in her hands like cracked mirrors. With Tom Parker, she tried to keep the family together for their 2 sons, Rick and Andy, but long filming schedules and emotional distance made reconciliation impossible. With Jim Hawkins, she hoped to find her final safe haven, but the pressures of making a living eroded their love into endless arguments. Lara raised 3 children almost entirely on her own, being mother, provider, and survivor in a world that constantly tested the careers of women. In the end, her greatest battle was not divorce, it was cancer. The disease clung to her for years, turning every morning into a new fight. Yet even through exhausting rounds of chemotherapy, Lara kept writing. Her 4 Dark Shadows novels, Angelique's Descent, The Salem Branch, Wolf Moon Rising, and Heiress of Collinwood, were all created during her most painful years. Lara Parker passed away in her sleep on October 12, 2023, in Los Angeles, at age 84, after many quiet years battling cancer in the same silence she had known all her life. She left behind 3 children, a literary legacy beloved by the Dark Shadows community, and a net worth of roughly $3 million. Nancy Barrett, as Carolyn Stoddard. Nancy Barrett was born on October 5, 1943, in Shreveport, Louisiana. In 1966, at just 23 years old, she became Carolyn Stoddard, Collinwood's rebellious young heiress, appearing in more than 700 episodes and becoming one of the brightest faces of Dark Shadows. But in real life, Nancy fell into the dangerous whirlpool of sudden fame. Her first marriage to Ralph Pine quickly crumbled when overnight stardom changed her into someone neither of them recognized. After their divorce, she entered her second marriage with co-star David Ford. But the lives of 2 young actors were consumed by pressure and jealousy. When this marriage collapsed as well, Nancy turned to alcohol as a temporary refuge. Through the 1970s and 80s, she spiraled deeper into addiction. From a beloved television star to a woman repeatedly entering rehab, struggling desperately between the stage and the shadows. Her roles in Ryan's Hope and One Life to Live were attempts to rescue herself from the abyss. The pain followed her into her third marriage to psychiatrist Harold Kaplan, the one man who truly saw Nancy as she was, fragile and breakable beneath the camera lights. But illness stole him from her in 1998, leaving Nancy alone again. She remarried in 2005, only for tragedy to repeat. Her final husband passed away after years of illness. Each loss tore away another piece of her life. In 2025, Nancy Barrett is 82, living quietly in New York. She no longer acts, but still appears at Dark Shadows conventions. Her estimated net worth is around $3 million. Modest, but enough for her to live out her remaining years as a woman who walked through storms and remained standing. Alexandra Isles, Moltke, as Victoria Winters. Alexandra Cornelia von Moltke was born on February 11, 1945, in Uppsala, Sweden. In 1966, at just 21 years old, she became Victoria Winters, the mysterious young woman who carried more than 600 episodes of Dark Shadows and became an icon of fragility and quiet intrigue. But once she stepped away from the set, Alexandra's life unfolded into a tragedy she never expected. Her first marriage to Philip Henry Isles II seemed like a peaceful escape from the pressures of fame. But only a year after leaving Dark Shadows due to pregnancy, her life took a far darker turn. She became the mistress of billionaire Klaus von Bülow, who was later accused of attempting to murder his wife with insulin. The case became the biggest scandal of the decade, dramatized in the Hollywood film Reversal of Fortune, and it thrust the full glare of public scrutiny onto Alexandra. She was subpoenaed as a witness, hounded by the press, and judged relentlessly by society. It was the moment that shattered her. After the scandal, Alexandra lived like a ghost. She withdrew from the spotlight and entered the world of documentary filmmaking. Her documentaries, about the Holocaust, political repression, forgotten suffering, all carried the tone of someone who had survived brutal public judgment. She later became a curator at the Museum of Television and Radio, then worked quietly at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In 2025, Alexandra Isles is 80, living quietly in New York, rarely appearing in public. She never returned to Hollywood and almost never speaks of Dark Shadows, except on rare occasions with devoted fans. Her net worth is estimated at around $5 million. John Karlen as Willie Loomis. John Adam Karlowitz was born on May 28, 1933, in Brooklyn, New York. In 1967, at 33 years old, he joined Dark Shadows as Willie Loomis, the man who accidentally opened the coffin that freed Barnabas and set the entire legend of the series in motion. But in real life, John was trapped in a decades-long tragedy. He married 3 times, but no marriage could save him from chronic alcoholism. Drinking transformed him into someone else. Erratic, angry, repeatedly fired from productions for showing up drunk on set. His first wife, Betty Karlen, spent years trying to hold the family together before finally giving up. Other women came and went. Even his only son once said, "My father was like 2 different people, sober and drunk." John's career wobbled with every fall, and at times he wanted to walk away from everything. Then Cagney and Lacey arrived like a late-life miracle. Thanks to his role as Harvey Lacey, John won an Emmy in 1986 and became one of American television's most beloved character actors. But behind the scenes, his heart still ached with loneliness, and his body deteriorated year by year from alcohol. Doctors warned him, but John never stopped. He once said, "Booze is what keeps my head quiet, but it's also what kills me a little more every day." Sadly, John Karlen died on January 22, 2020, in Burbank from heart failure at 86 years old. His net worth at the time of his death was estimated at around $3 million. Joel Crothers as Joe Haskell. Joel Anthony Crothers was born on January 28, 1941 in Cincinnati, Ohio. In 1966, at 25 years old, he appeared in Dark Shadows as Joe Haskell. The earnest young man swept into Collinsport's supernatural tragedies, leaving a lasting impression on viewers. But outside the studio lights, Crothers' life took an even darker path. As his career rose with The Secret Storm, Somerset, and eventually his defining role as Miles Cavanaugh on The Edge of Night, Joel lived with a fear shared by many gay actors of his time, that he could never live openly. He loved men, but Hollywood in the 1970s to 80s was unforgiving. He even became engaged to his close friend, actress Velika Gray, just to protect his career. His real love had to hide behind closed doors. That secrecy drained him, leaving him isolated and under crushing emotional pressure. By the early 1980s, even as his stage and television roles continued, another nightmare struck: the AIDS epidemic. His friends disappeared one by one. The entertainment world plunged into fear and stigma. Joel pushed himself to keep working on Santa Barbara, even as his body began to fail. The illness progressed too quickly. In the final months of his life, he still appeared on set, growing thinner each day, trying to remain composed while silent pain tore at him. On November 6, 1985, Joel Crothers died from AIDS-related lymphoma at just 44, becoming one of the earliest entertainment industry victims of the epidemic in the United States. His net worth at the time of his death was estimated at around $1 million. Kate Jackson as Daphne Harridge. Lucy Kate Jackson was born on October 29, 1948 in Birmingham, Alabama. In 1968, at age 20, she played the silent ghost Daphne Harridge in Dark Shadows, only about 200 episodes, yet enough to make her one of the series' memorable faces. No one could have predicted that she would later become one of the biggest icons in American television and endure some of the most painful struggles in her personal life. When Charlie's Angels exploded in popularity, Kate Jackson became an international superstar. But fame could not protect her from heartbreak. 3 marriages ended in collapse. Romances fell apart under the weight of her celebrity. Her finances were exploited, and she suffered betrayals even within her own work. She was originally offered the role of Joanna Kramer in Kramer vs. Kramer. But the producers of Charlie's Angels refused to adjust her shooting schedule. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she lost it because of a contract. The blow devastated her, and then illness struck. In 1987, Kate was diagnosed with breast cancer for the first time. She quietly checked into the hospital under a false name for surgery, then returned to set just a week later. 2 years later, the cancer returned more aggressively, forcing her to undergo a mastectomy, which meant she would never be able to carry a pregnancy. Between surgeries, radiation, and painkillers, Kate tried to keep working while also trying to hold together a family she ultimately could not save. Men came and went. Some abandoned her, others treated her like a walking wallet. In 2025, Kate Jackson turns 77. She has not appeared on screen since 2009 and now lives quietly with her adopted son, rarely appearing in public. She survived 2 bouts of cancer, underwent heart surgery, and narrowly avoided bankruptcy after suing her financial advisor. Her current net worth is around $10 million, largely from Charlie's Angels residuals and decades of hard work. Mitchell Ryan as Burke Devlin. Mitchell Ryan was born on January 11, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio. In 1966, at 32 years old, he appeared in Dark Shadows as Burke Devlin, the mysterious businessman who returns to Collinsport seeking revenge, a powerful role that instantly captivated viewers. But just as Burke was becoming an icon, Mitchell Ryan fell into a darkness he would struggle with for years: alcoholism. The pressure of long shooting days and an isolated life in New York pushed him deeper into drinking. He arrived on set intoxicated, sometimes unable to remember his lines, sometimes collapsing in the middle of scenes. The production team had to make a harsh but necessary decision. He was fired in 1967 and replaced. The humiliation shattered Ryan's pride. He had not only lost the biggest role of his life, but had become an industry cautionary tale. Behind closed doors, he drowned his disappointment in alcohol, only sinking further, repeatedly coming close to death as his liver and heart weakened. It took more than a decade for Ryan to get sober. He returned with commanding roles in Magnum Force, North and South, and especially as the villainous General McAllister in Lethal Weapon alongside Mel Gibson. Despite his professional comeback, his heart still carried deep scars from the past. 2 marriages destroyed, long periods of tension with his children, and the lingering guilt over years wasted to addiction. On March 4, 2022, Mitchell Ryan took his final breath in Los Angeles due to heart failure at age 88. His net worth at the time of his death was estimated at around $3 million. Thayer David as Ben Stokes and Professor Stokes. Thayer David was born on March 4, 1927, in Medford, Massachusetts. In 1966, at 39 years old, he appeared in Dark Shadows in multiple roles, most notably Ben Stokes and Professor Stokes, becoming the heart of more than 200 episodes with one of the most distinctive gravelly voices on television. But behind his commanding and scholarly screen persona was a body deteriorating day by day. Weighing more than 150 kilograms and smoking heavily, David's health declined rapidly. He worked compulsively to escape the crushing loneliness that followed him for decades. A collapsed marriage, failed romances, and a habit of binge eating whenever depression struck. What made his tragedy even more heartbreaking was that just 1 month before his death, David had remarried for the 3rd time. After years of believing he was no longer worthy of love, he finally found a woman who made him want to start over. But just as that happiness began to bloom, his exhausted heart gave out. On July 17, 1978, Thayer David died of a heart attack at age 51. At the time of his passing, he left behind an estimated net worth of about $2 million, along with the legacy of a brilliant, erudite, extraordinarily talented actor whose life was overshadowed by his own body and invisible emotional wounds. Dennis Patrick as Paul Stoddard and Jason McGuire. Dennis Patrick Harrison was born on March 14, 1918, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In 1966, at 48 years old, he joined Dark Shadows in the dual roles of Paul Stoddard and Jason McGuire. Manipulative, enigmatic characters who brought a chilling edge to the series that no one else could replicate. But behind the camera, his life was marked by deep, personal turmoil. Patrick's private world was soaked in loss. His first marriage to Amelia Honora Baines collapsed after years of conflict, leaving him with 2 daughters he loved dearly but rarely had the chance to be close to. When he eventually found new happiness with actress Barbara Kaysen, it seemed as if life had finally settled. But fate proved far crueler than any script he ever performed. Barbara died in 1990, leaving Patrick alone in their large home. The prolonged grief shook his mental health, and his career, after Dark Shadows, gradually dimmed, reduced to a handful of minor roles in his final years. On October 13, 2002, a massive fire consumed Dennis Patrick's entire home within minutes. The flames were so intense that his remains could only be identified through dental records. He died at age 84, inside the very house he once called home, even though it had long become a prison of loneliness. At the time of his death, Patrick's net worth was estimated at around $2 million, most of it tied to the property that had burned to the ground. Looking back at each fate, we begin to understand that the darkness of Dark Shadows didn't just live on screen. It haunted the real lives of the people who created its legacy. Which story shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss more behind-the-scenes secrets and the heartbreaking journeys of Hollywood stars.